grievance meeting in which I recapped the directive and no concern about that. There was no challenge to the way that that verbal meeting was conducted.
Yeah, there was a conversation with Brian and Andrew, Aaron and
Can you tell me where, excuse me,
Oh,
sorry
yeah,
to cut you off. Can you tell me where that?
Give me 1 second.
I think it's right behind the grievance, right? Or
Yeah, it should
It's
be
the
right behind
third
the
page
grievance.
after the first
Yeah.
tab.
Oh, it's in the front, okay.
Yeah.
it says
I
level
was
one.
looking at the
grievance.
emails in
Yeah.
the back.
It's the February 28th, 2024 email, Aaron, that you're
Yes,
referring to?
correct, yes.
So recap the directive. And I know we'll get to the administration's position on that engagement, but I just wanted to at least establish where the union is alleging the directive occurred. So it's
Yeah, and that was originally in a verbal meeting between Mr. Scott, Ms. Beebe, and Mr. Marchand and myself.
okay. So with that, I would just turn, and I apologize to the other members of the board for exercising a little bit of chair's latitude to just continue talking, but I'd like to turn as well to the relief that you're looking for. It's a little unclear to me why you include compensation in your requested relief if your actual relief that you really want is if there's any directive being issued, you'd like it to cease. So could you just clarify what relief the union's actually seeking from the board that it can meet?
Because we're working backwards a little bit. The counselors were directed to go for the trips on February 29th, March 6th and 7th. And so there's no possible response that we could have come up with in that time between that, right? So we're filing the grievance for the back, in essence, back pay for those 3 people who have already attended without compensation and without volunteering.
So, okay, so the union is not seeking to rectify this in the future by setting down.
There definitely should be a conversation about how this is handled in the future.
Okay.
And this meeting and your decision is going to have an impact on how this is handled in the future.
Sure.
And you know, and hopefully there's going to be some kind of resolution that we can look to that would give us the answer to what, you know, to your question about what compensation looks like and what it doesn't look like. It's our position that teachers who are going to do something this extensive, regardless of at that kind of length of time, that they should be compensated in some way or another.
So I'm done. Can I pass it to Glenn first before we come back to you?
Yeah, just for clarification for me to understand this. This is strictly a high school, correct?
Yes,
Okay, how many guidance counselors are there at the high school?
there's 5, right? There's
And
5.
these trips are one at a time, and there's one guidance counselor that has to go on this trip with these students?
Yes.
So why is it that not one of the 5 guidance counselors would volunteer to go on this trip?
I mean, they had previously volunteered for the trips in April 2023 and December 2023. Each of the guidance counselors went on one trip. I couldn't tell you what the motivation is behind this
Not wanting to go.
not wanting to go. I mean, it's a long day, maybe that's why. I don't know. Barb, do you have something you might add to that? Can you add anything to that particular?
I just think what you said is the length of day outside of our hours. We're missing family time. We're missing things that are going on in our personal lives.
Do you still want to ask additional questions?
Just one thing, you had said that you referenced kind of globally some type of compensation would be appreciated. Brooker Memorial is paying for the transportation, the food and everything, exclamation point, according to the email in here. So there's nothing coming out of pocket. I'm struggling with this because it's not come up in the past. We have teachers that go on field trips all the time, extended day, and we're not getting this type of grievance. So I'm just
Yeah, I mean, I'm
struggling
going to
with
make the
understanding.
distinction that a 14-hour field trip, it is a 14-hour field trip because the whole day is spent on
Well,
the
what
field
about the
trip.
trips to Europe and Washington? You don't get extra pay for that. The trip is paid for for you.
I think the basis
But
is
that's
it's
voluntary.
So that their allegation is resting entirely, tell me if I'm wrong. The allegation and therefore the grievance is based entirely on the fact that you contend that the attendance was directed and mandatory, and that therefore you had no recourse other than to either attend or be insubordinate, and therefore, because the district directed you, you would like to be paid.
Yes.
From the teacher's point of view, how are these mandated volunteers chosen?
I think Principal Scott left it up to the department, right?
Mhm.
And then they had 4 trips remaining. One was snowed out, I believe, right,
Yes,
on February 28th or something. And, you know, it's 5 members of the department, so we find, 4 members to go. And so they discussed it amongst themselves. Is that correct, Barb?
Yeah, we were told that we decide amongst our department who's going to attend these trips, and if nobody decided, then they would tell us who's gonna attend these trips.
So instead of letting administration decide, you did it among yourselves.
Mhm.
How many students go on this at one
I
time?
think it's 5
And you
each trip.
send 4 guidance counselors for 5 students?
No,
Just
one,
one?
one
Okay,
per
so
one.
each of the 5 guidance counselors has been directed to take one of these trips per year, basically.
No, I mean, the
Right.
previous ones they volunteered for.
And
So you see back-
there's 4 a year, 3 a year, I think.
No, there was
7.
5 last year and 7 this year. And on
Okay,
one
so-
occasion, Andrew Marchand went in one of those December trips.
So it could be spread equally for one a year per guidance counselor if Andrew goes and there's someone else. Right, we're talking about
Yeah,
7
I mean,
trips.
just theoretically, yes.
Theoretically.
Mr. Kisco and then Mr.
But you're not accepting that as a de minimis sort of thing, right? I mean, it's still 6.5 or 7
No, I mean,
hours added to the day.
Yeah, it's a long, I mean, I don't consider this your usual field trip. I mean, it's just a really long time outside your regular day. And when you're when you're in elementary and you're going on all these field trips, it's kind of it's kind of the thing, you know what I mean? It's kind of, it's kind of a core thing. And I don't feel that this is. And I mean, if you're gonna have like, we have, there's plenty of times that, teachers would, I mean, they have financial aid night, they have college fair, they have college night. They've all volunteered and they've actually planned those activities, volunteered for that activities, and taken the initiative in putting together those activities. And this is, for us, is just beyond that.
You said it's a core thing. And I don't know understand this, I don't. But what concerns me is, in the entire guidance department, nobody stepped up. And this, I'll lose my thought.
Yeah, of course.
They don't last very long. And to me, from an outsider, and I deal with unions in our business, unions. But as a principal, I would draw the conclusion that they're just trying to get back at us. They're going to make a stand here, and nobody volunteered. So my job as the principal is to step in and say somebody's got to go. And I don't know if it's advised by the contract or not. We'll ask that question next because I'm not aware. I really don't know, and it may not. I don't know, but it's a bad precedent to set when the entire department of guidance counselors, and it's no more core than in high school. There's nothing more core in high school than something like this. I'd say this is very core for a guidance counselor in high school, because I don't think the kids ever get enough, nothing to do with the current guidance counselors. There's not enough time to give the kids the needs or the attention that they need. And something like this should be very important to those guidance counselors. So, I'm not sure how to take it that 5 guidance counselors just decided we're not going to volunteer, but go ahead.
If I could address that for a moment. I want to keep in mind that the guidance counselors did volunteer for a number of these sessions, but these sessions are ongoing with really no end in sight. And there comes a point where, as a family person, as a worker, you have to look at your life and your work-life balance and say, I'm sorry, I don't have it in me at this point to volunteer to do these couple of trips. And the contract lays out, in our interpretation of the contract, lays out that my working day is as such. So it's great when they do volunteer, and they did step up and they did volunteer, but I don't believe that they should be chastised for not choosing to volunteer on an ongoing basis.
But sometimes that happens, don't you think?
I'm gonna say that, you know, there are,
I mean, every
there's
working relationship, that kind of thing goes back and forth. I know I do it. And I get
But
chastised as well.
It's a
but
slippery slope,
I
and
don't disagree with you.
yeah,
I mean, I get it. There's lots of compelling things that the school district has to achieve. I mean, we have extended school year for students with IEPs. They have to have the help.
That's a difference. That's a
I get it, but I
different
mean, it's just a
situation, like
compelling
with
thing. It's a
apples and
core
oranges.
thing. That's just my response to that question.
Well, I think the administration is going to put on their case when we're concluded with asking questions of the union, and then maybe we'll end up, I'm almost certain we'll have another round of Q&A at that point. Mr. Putnam is in it.
Yep, just two things. I'll just touch on, I would see this as a field trip. Comparing it against extended school years, I don't think it's a fair comparison, but my question is, what are the responsibilities? Because this email talks about what somebody would do while they're on this trip. So can somebody clarify maybe what the exact responsibilities are on this trip? It sounds,
I would have to be Bob, because I don't.
the email just makes it sound like we need to go, we need to support the kids and be there for them, but there's a large chunk of time where one is, it says, read a book, knit, or do whatever else you want to do while you're waiting around. I'm just trying to understand, for clarity, what the trip actually entails, so that we understand.
So there was 2 chaperones on the trip. One was from Torrington High School, and then Brooker Memorial provided a chaperone as well, someone on their board or one of the people who works at Brooker Memorial. So yeah, we were just there for the students if they needed us. So we would travel to Boston or New York, whatever it was. So about 2 hours to 3 hours, 3.5 hours in a car with the kids. And then when we were there, we were the ones who were responsible for the kids while we were there. So they would go and do their testing, and we would wait in the waiting room. That comment in those emails, we were trying to get people to want to volunteer for these trips. We were trying to compel people to want to volunteer for these trips, and nobody was stepping up. So that's where that verbiage came from, or that was the strategy behind that. But we would work. So we would sit in the waiting room while the kids were testing, and we would have our laptops, and I know the school personnel, we would be checking our email, catching up on other work that we were doing. And we were doing that the whole time until we left Boston.
Is it a small bus?
We were on a van. Yeah.
Did you guys get a chance to, a lot of time for some one-on-one connection with these students on the trip up and back?
Yeah, I mean, on the trip up, the kids have their headphones in and they're sleeping. But when we were there, during lunch, during breaks, we would talk with the kids. How's the testing going? What are you liking? What are you not liking? Yeah, we were connecting with the kids during those times.
Thank you.
Giving feedback.
The additional questions, I know it says discussion on the agenda, but we certainly will have plenty of time to discuss and deliberate as well later. So are there any additional questions for the union?
Just a hypothetical, not related to anything other than what would you say, and I'm concerned about it, if, because some of these costs were excessive and they couldn't afford to go, how would the teachers and the guys such as feel if the board or the superintendent just decided to go out to parents, chaperones on every trip because they were concerned about, some of the agreement that we have to pay? I mean, would that pose a problem for the professionals that are being within the school system? Because me as an owner of a company, I'd look at, I'm thinking about it, making my decision tonight, what the unintended consequences are of something like this. How it impacts both the teachers, guidance counselors, administrators, and the students. And if somebody asked me, well, if you have to pay every time, why don't we just go to parents? I might say, maybe not a bad idea. I don't know. But have you thought about that?
and this is where I think the concern with the compensation is really muddying the larger concern. The compensation, as Mike explained, the timesheets were put in were because we didn't have time to read this and have a discussion about how these trips should be handled before they happened. So the guidance counselors were required to go before we could come to a conclusion about what would be the best means forward. And so because of that, we are looking for some form of compensation for their time. I mean, my hypothetical, sort of back to you, Mr. Galuda, would be, what is now the situation if we say that any program that lasts into the afternoon, into the evening, into the summer, that would be considered a field trip, we are now requiring teachers to attend regardless of their working contract. And now I can just, that's the unintended consequences I think that we're more concerned about, is keeping to the limits of what has been set up as the working year and the working day for faculty and staff, so as not to, as I said, with the slippery slope, and to your point as well, like not to create these unintended consequences of where this could go.
Last call. Any further questions? No. Okay. So if the administration is interested in putting on any remarks, Jusha.
Yes, thank you. I just have a few additional exhibits. I do appreciate that Mr. Brady put together a number of the documents that I was also going to present, so I don't want to be redundant. But what I am passing around is just the specific excerpts from the teacher's contract that I want to highlight so that we don't have to go through the full contract. And then the other thing that I am passing around, because again, some of the other exhibits would be redundant, is a spreadsheet that I will talk about in further detail with respect to other field trips that have been attended by guidance counselors over the years. So I want to look at this from a legal procedural standpoint. So I want to talk about that first, because I want the board to have a sense as to what the scope of their charge is this evening from a contractual standpoint. And then I do want to address the merits. So if we were before an arbitrator right now, I would make an argument that this grievance is not properly before you as a threshold matter. And the reason why I would say that is if you look at the contract excerpts that I gave you, what we need to be focused on as board members is what is the definition, the legal definition of a contract that these two parties specifically negotiated. So if you look at page 1 of the contract excerpts, the definition of a grievance is a complaint by a teacher or group of teachers that there has been, as to him or her or them, a violation or inequitable application of any of the provisions of this contract. So now we actually have to look at the specific contract language and say, okay, based on the contract language cited by the union, are we in violation of that language as a result of requiring these teachers to attend this trip and not compensating them? So if you go to page, I'm going to jump around a little bit, but if you go to page 5 of the excerpts that I gave you, Mr. Brady specifically pointed out Article 26, Section A and Article 26, Section B. If you look at Article 26, Section A, that is specific to summer days for guidance counselors. There's nothing in there that talks about field trips. There's nothing in there that talks about compensation. And there's nothing in there that requires us to first solicit volunteers. You then go to Section B. Each teacher shall have a professional workday of 7 hours and 20 minutes. Now, I have never read that in a contract means the teachers don't work beyond their contractual workday. That is the expectation of when teachers are in the building. And another thing that I think is very important from a public policy standpoint is our teachers are salaried employees. Their role is to get the job done, whatever that takes. They are not paraprofessionals. They are not custodians. They are not paid hourly. They are paid a set salary, and the expectations are if I can't get my grading done beyond the 7 hours and 20 minutes that are listed here, I'm going to get my grading done on a Sunday or when I get home, just like most consummate professionals do. If we were to now say, because we've gone above and beyond the workday on a field trip, which there are many examples of teachers going on field trips that don't get additional compensation if it isn't in the contract, we're setting a very dangerous precedent to say that every time they do something outside of this contractual workday and outside of the building, we now have to compensate them. Now, Mr. Brady also noted several places in the contract where you do provide additional compensation. What he did not remark upon is field trips and additional compensation because it's nowhere in the contract. So I bring you back to process. Where is the language that we have violated? The other thing that they also noted in their requests for compensation, which is at the end of Mr. Brady's documents, they've also put in language or a suggestion, and if you look at page 4 of the excerpts that I provided you, that somehow they should be compensated based on the analysis of teaching 6 classes. And so again, I'm confused by where the compensation is coming from because it speaks to a per diem compensation, and they appear to be using the formula in subsection I as to this is a 6th class. This is not a 6th class. This is a field trip that happens approximately once a year. And then there's also reference from Ms. Odlum's request for compensation that we are not to be assigned duties. Again, a field trip is not a duty by definition and by mutual understanding. So I would submit that procedurally, this is not a grievance as defined and specifically negotiated between the parties. But now I'd like to get to the merits, because if I were in arbitration, I would make my procedural argument, but I reserve the right to also address the merits. So I do not feel that this is a violation of the contract. I also, when we talk about this opportunity, it really is very disappointing that here you have an opportunity, you've been given this grant money. The very core of a school guidance counselor is to help students beyond graduation, whether it be vocational, whether it be I want to go to college, whether it be I want to see what my aptitude is for other things. That's a remarkable opportunity that Torrington was given. To say that that is not at the core of what our guidance counselors do is really disappointing. In the sheet here that I have given you, there are examples in which, and I want to talk because I think the union's argument breaks down to first compensation, and then we can talk about the voluntary part. So just from a compensation standpoint, what has been highlighted in yellow, and I do believe that there are other examples, but for purposes of tonight, this is what we were able to locate, in which guidance counselors did go on these field trips and were not given additional compensation. Again, because there was nothing in the contract that requires that. So in our minds, this is a past practice that has been established for the last couple of years, and the union has waived their right to make any argument that they are entitled to a per diem compensation because they didn't raise it previously. It is a well-established tenet of labor law that if I don't raise it at the first time that it occurs, and then there's multiple occurrences later on, I in essence agree and have waived my right to grieve it under the contract. From a voluntary standpoint, there's, again, nothing in the contract that requires that we first solicit volunteers. The fact that our administration was willing to do that, I think speaks volumes that the administration was willing to do that. But then when you're told we don't have any guidance counselors who are willing to go, from a strictly public policy standpoint, now you're telling me you're holding us hostage, and so now we can't provide this opportunity to our students. And our Torrington students, they don't get a lot of these opportunities. Let's think about sometimes what, some of the students that we're seeing on a regular basis. These are not opportunities that come by very often for a lot of these children. And so from a voluntary standpoint, it's okay, if we don't have volunteers, we can't offer the program, now you're gonna hold us hostage unless we provide payment, which 1, there's not a past practice of that, and 2, there is nothing in the contracts that requires that. And so I think when the administration looked at this, it's pretty upsetting because what we should be focused on is what is in the best educational interests of our students and what is the core of being a guidance counselor. And so I think when we went through this, there's some significant disappointment on our part. Again, I want to reflect that, it was our hope that we didn't have to be here. You know, it's not something that we take lightly to be here. Certainly, I know Mr. Brady doesn't take it lightly either. This is probably one of 3 or 4 grievances that you've had in a long time. But I think we have a solid argument on the procedural and the contractual, but I also think that sometimes you have to take a stand on things, on principle. And this was something that the administration was not willing to let go because of the devastating consequences for our students if we were to give into this request. So from our position, we would hope that you would deny the grievance, but I'm also happy to answer any questions, or if anyone here in the administration can be helpful to you, we certainly can ask them questions as well.
Excellent, thank you. I will, again, exercise my chair's discretion to take the floor first. So you first make an argument to us about the legitimacy of the grievance in general, and of course you use definition 1 because that's the one that most suits your position. But just beyond that, you know, it reads that they have been treated inequitably by reason of any act or condition which is contrary to established school system policy or practice governing or affecting employees, which I think the union has certainly alleged that they've been treated inequitably. Whether you believe they have been or not, you know, I'm not really sure where the legitimacy argument comes from, other than there, which I think is really clearly refuted just a couple lines below what you cited.
But it says to establish school system policy. So what we have presented, that there is no policy on this issue. There's no contractual provision. So I think if you go on to say an established school system policy, when you don't have clear contract language, you have to rely on the practice. And the practice here has been, in the document that we have showed you, that they have not been guidance counselors compensated for field trips beyond the contractual workday. And so again, this isn't really differing from any practice. And again, I think the solicitation of volunteers is not per se an established practice. And even if it were, if we don't get volunteers, the union is not in a position to hold us hostage. And I think that there's a strong public policy argument.
Thank you. My second question sort of loosely ties in, because you used the phrase professional workday a few times, and I see it defined, of course. I think it's pretty clear. Each teacher shall have a professional workday of 7 hours and 20 minutes, even have the numerals in parentheses just in case. So I think it's pretty clearly defined. And you, of course, made a pretty thorough argument, I think, that there are things that most professionals do beyond their professional workday. But immediately after that, you contended that this field trip is absolutely core and essential to the professional tasks set before a guidance counselor, which I think is probably the correct position. But I would say, to my reading of your argument so far, those two positions are at odds with one another. So I'm wondering if you would either pick one for us or elaborate maybe to us on how you can take both of those positions at once, that A, this is not part of their professional workday, and B, attending a field trip is essential to the professional tasks of a guidance counselor.
No, I meant the trip because it's specific to career aptitude and post-secondary school aptitude. That is something that I would think guidance counselors would actually be, bursting at the seams to be a part of. I mean, if that's what I do, I went into education to be a guidance counselor so that I could help kids figure out what they're going to do post-high school. This would be something that I would absolutely volunteer for. I'm not sure that I contradicted myself, so I'm happy to clarify, but that is what I meant by that argument.
Okay, well, I guess in the same vein then, when we're discussing professional workdays, you define certain things maybe that would be outside of the teacher's typical professional workday. And I understand this is the teacher's contract, but the folks at issue in front of us do have a somewhat different role than a teacher as guidance counselors. So I guess my gut instinct would be to consider, going on a field trip related to the subject matter that they deal with day to day to be part of their professional workday. And And so far, I guess it hasn't been an issue because, and there's I would say, a good argument for the past practice, but is this, in the administration's opinion, is this or is this not, this meaning attending this specific field trip with this specific task, is it or is it not part of the professional workday of a guidance counselor? I'm just gonna cut the question.
Well, so there's a contractual professional workday, right? But there is not a single teacher, because teachers work really hard, including our guidance counselors, that can possibly only get their work done in 7 hours and 20 minutes. They are salaried employees. They are not hourly employees. This is an opportunity that I believe you've only been given twice. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's part and parcel of what a guidance counselor does. So yes, do they physically need to be in the building for 7 hours and 20 minutes or 7 hours and 25 minutes? Yes, but it doesn't mean that in order to meet my professional expectations or to get the job done, that there aren't times where I'm doing things outside of being in the building. And this is, and again, this is once a year. So respectfully, when we talk about work-life family balance, this is one time. This is not multiple. I can understand if this were once a week or there were multiple expectations of this. They just said it was one guidance counselor being assigned one day a year. So
it sounds like you're, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like your position is that it would be considered, if you will, a past practice that most folks have to do a little work beyond the contractual workday as part of their salary
I think it's a
responsibilities.
reality. I think it's a reality across, it's not specific to Torrington, it's a reality across the profession. That there's no way you can get it done, and that everyone would say that. And many times teachers would say that to me. There's a lot of work that I do, and that's what professionals do. That's why you're salaried and you're not paid hourly. That's why you're compensated the way that you are.
And then my final thought, I recognize I'm monopolizing, I apologize. My final question is related to the union's case. Because I think even after all this, I'm still focused on the fact that this entire process and likely our decision is predicated on whether or not we find that Mr. Scott issued a directive to these guidance counselors that they must do this as part of their responsibilities. And I'm wondering if the administration would remark on that or make Mr. Scott available to do so.
Certainly, if Mr. Scott is comfortable, but respectfully, I would just say, that's why I highlighted what your charge is. Your charge is not whether or not he issued a directive. Your charge is whether or not their claim violates a contractual provision. There's nothing in the contract that speaks to a directive about field trips or about soliciting volunteers for field trips or about providing additional compensation about field trips. So again, I would just respectfully ask that the board narrow the scope of their charge there, because respectfully, I believe that that would be outside of what has been claimed.
And generally, I'm happy to take your legal counsel, but in this case, I would say that there's a not unreasonable case to be made that if a directive was issued in this matter, then I certainly would give much more weight to the union's arguments than I would otherwise. And there's really not significant written evidence in either direction. Although I do see an email from Mr. Scott that may be helpful to you, where he says, one counselor will need to chaperone each of those trips. Please let me know which counselors will be attending. Now, I don't view that as a directive on its face. I view that as in line with the past practice of asking the guidance department which of its employees will be volunteering. So, I guess I'm making your case for you a little bit, but I really think that it doesn't matter whether or not there was a directive issued, and I'd like the administration to take a stand on that.
Sure. I mean, I would say first, Mr. Corey, you heard the union themselves say, well, he solicited volunteers, they didn't get it. So then he said, okay, please pick amongst yourselves who will go to these. Again, that's different from you are hereby directed. But again, I also, and again, there's also no established labor law on the public policy component. So otherwise now you're held hostage if we have no volunteers. So even if he had issued a directive, which again, I don't think that there's evidence that there was this very specific hard directive, but now we can't offer the trip. We have this grant money. We we can't use this grant money because we can't get people to go on the trip. And I do think if we were before an arbitrator, they would really hone in on that.
All right, I'll set.
So just to clarify, Mr. Scott was basically exercising his authority as their superior to send them on a field trip, send someone on a field trip.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. Scott, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Sure. I mean, I think Aaron and Barb captured what the meeting was. We met after I had found out that no counselors were going to volunteer to go on the next trip, and Andrew Marchand had gone on the previous trip. And I told them that they were going to need to have a guidance counselor go on the trip, and they needed to select amongst themselves as to which counselor would go on the trip. And then I followed it up with that email.
So there was no threat of retaliation
I did
or
not threaten anybody,
intimidation
no.
or termination if they didn't go on the trip.
No, I did not threaten anyone, but I did tell them that a counselor was going to have to go.
So in none of the individual guidance counselors were pinpointed to say this, you're gonna go on this one, you're gonna go on this one, you're gonna go on this one.
If I may clarify, or do you want me to?
Wait a second.
Yes, of course, I'm sorry.
Let me finish.
Oh, you answered my question. Just wanted to know if there was specifically, someone was told they had to go on a certain date. You just said someone has to go.
Yes.
Any other?
It's just, my problem is, why wasn't, can you ask them why it wasn't brought up in negotiations?
Well, let's focus our questioning, a line of questioning first in the administration, and then before we conclude, we can make sure that we get everything else.
So I'm still not satisfied that this grievance isn't properly before us, because reading section A, a grievance is a complaint, blah, 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 a violation or inequitable application, and this is a violation of the provisions of the contract, and then the next language defines, the next language in the complaint defines the workday, and these people have been asked to stay longer than the workday. And the fact that they've, out of the goodness of their professionalism, done this in the past, you are using as an argument to say they should be bound to do it into the future, and that we could tell them to do whatever we want them to do, whenever we want them to do.
No, I don't think that that's what I'm saying.
That's what I
Mr.
heard.
I didn't hear
But-
that at all.
But what I'm saying is I don't believe that this meets the definition of a grievance. And that is an argument that I would make. That's an argument that I'm making here. Certainly you are free to disagree with our argument, but our position would be it's not a violation.
Any additional questions specifically for the administration? So if,
Mr. Corey, you have to respond.
well, hold on.
Right.
So it seems like there are some board members who have some additional questions. We have on the agenda some closing thoughts from both parties as well, but if you would be willing, and you're under no obligation to do so, to answer at least one or two additional questions from members of the board, it seems like there are some. Okay, did you still have a question for me?
Yeah, you gave your walkthrough. I'm not a lawyer. I never saw this. So maybe try to convince me again that it's in the contract and that we should vote for them being paid, voting for them to be allowed to be paid, or that they cannot be directed by the principal to do something, which may be, and I do believe it is, I said this, I never saw this, but you brought core things. I do believe that a guidance counselor's responsibility, one of his core responsibilities in high school, is to be a part of this process. And yes, teachers and professional, obviously. I don't know how long the workday should be on those extra days. I don't think one or two volunteers a year is too many, but convince me that that the contract, from your standpoint, does not allow for this.
All right, well, I'll talk about one of the, just in response to your question about one of Jessica's arguments about teachers being salary employees and not hourly employees. And no teacher, and I'll admit it, especially in Torrington, no teacher's getting their work done in 7 hours and 20 minutes. These guidance counselors aren't getting their work done in 7 hours and 20 minutes because they're talking to students in crisis after the school day or before the school day. They're taking care of letters of recommendation when they can't get it, they can't fit it in the school day. They're taking care of it after school day. They're scheduling kids. they're helping kids with college apps. It all happens outside the school day. Because they're self-directing themselves to get their work done. That's what's happening. You have a contract, okay, I don't buy Jessica's argument. You know, we've both done hundreds of these things. The laws favor arbitration over these procedural issues. I have a contractual provision that says the school day is 7 hours and 20 minutes. It's arbitral. I'll take my chances on the procedural end. But my response is, we have a specific contract article there. We feel it's been violated, okay? Yes, Mr. Scott can give directives, and let me respond to that too, so maybe I'll handle some of these questions before. If he says you have to find a guidance counselor to go, and Erin calls me, I'm saying find a guidance counselor to go and we'll take care of it later, because I'm not taking that chance. It doesn't have to be, you have to go or you're gonna be, I'm gonna issue a written warning or something. It's my advice every time that happens, not just with teachers, but all the previous people I represented the last 25 years, is if you have a problem, you just do what you're told and you file the grievance, and that's what we did. So, I mean, I hope that answers your question. I don't come here lightly. I've only been, I think, one time. I've been here since 2015. If I didn't think it was important, if I thought it was BS, I wouldn't be here. They are handling their core functions outside the school day, just like any other teacher. This is not that. And I understand it's an important program and it should be important to you folks. And I take issue with this word hostage that just used like 3 or 4 times. These guidance counselors went on where all these yellow highlights are guidance counselors going without compensation. And they went on this trip too. We didn't hold anybody hostage. We told them to go. I told them to go. And here we are because we feel the contract's been violated. So,
Mr. Brady, can I
Yes.
ask for a second? On Mr. Yukulita's question.
yeah, go ahead.
I think to address your question, continue to address your question about that element of after the school day and the work and it being core, is the idea that the work that is done after the school day is self-directed, so that you determine where it fits in to your personal after-school time to self-direct, to fit it in, to get the work done. And in these cases where teachers and guidance counselors have gone, that voluntary aspect is I'm self-directing, I can choose this time, I have choice in that matter with which to do that in a way that fits into my time beyond the contract. And in this case, it was not self-directed.
Here's the only thing though, I wasn't as brought up in the contract. If it was part of the contract negotiations, maybe it would make it a lot clearer for us going forward. But not sure me they were clear in the contract. To go forward with something like this, when this many volunteers are volunteering, the minute we say, okay, we have to pay you, you're right, we have to pay you. I don't know how many people are gonna volunteer without getting paid. If it's not clear in the contract as a board member, maybe it should be discussed in the next contract, as part of the next contract, because I'm torn, but, the consequence will be everybody's gonna ask to get paid. That will be the consequence, and that's, I don't think that looks good on your side, and the reaction will be, here they go again. From my standpoint, is do I make a decision like that and then allow this cascade? And I'm not saying it's gonna be a cascade, but why would you? If you have the right to ask for pay, you can ask for pay. And to be honest, you should, if it's clear and if it's in the contract. But anyway,
I'm going to give you I'll give you the inverse of that argument, or the converse of that argument. The board put in a contract proposal that guidance counselors were to attend FAFSA nights without compensation, and they withdrew that proposal. That's my argument. Basically, they know the board put in a proposal for hours outside the regular day for guidance counselors. If it was important, they would have held on to the proposal.
That's not true.
I understand. I don't know what happens.
Don't interrupt, hold on.
Don't even.
I don't know what
Tell
those.
me about the negotiations.
Go ahead.
We're one step.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
He can-
completely.
I'm trying to
he can
respond to
continue
a
to-
question.
you can
I
continue
wouldn't
to
have put
put
it
up-
up if I didn't get the
Stop
time.
talking
Sorry.
when I am talking. You can continue to put on your case, and if you have a problem with it, you have a problem with it, you can address it after he is done speaking. Please proceed,
I'm
sir.
done. I'm just responding to his question. That's the only reason I raised it.
Okay.
I wasn't part of those, so I'm not clear. They can raise the issues.
Did you want to address
No,
that?
I
Okay.
don't.
Did you want to respond
I'm not
or
gonna give it
close
air
your
time because
argument?
I think it's completely irrelevant to these proceedings, and actually, I think it's pretty unprofessional to raise that here.
Okay,
Now
well, yeah,
go ahead.
Gary brought it up. I wouldn't blame Mike for
No.
bringing it up.
Gary didn't
But
bring up the
I have
contents
a
of the
question
negotiations.
that it may be appropriate, tell me if it isn't. What happens when a guidance counselor isn't there? What happens to the work that that counselor would have been doing? Do other counselors have extra load, or what happens?
Robert?
Students come to us.
During the trip, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, counselor goes on this trip instead of staying to do his or her job in the school.
So if we go on any field trip, we're just not there. So if our students need us for that day, they don't see us, we have to catch up on them another day. If there's a student in crisis, then another counselor takes that student in crisis, or a social worker takes that student in crisis. Paperwork, all that kind of stuff just sits until.
So it's important to have everyone there as much as possible, right?
I thought you said earlier that you took your laptops and you did work while
We
you were
do
there,
email,
so it's
paperwork,
either you're
catch up
working
on
or
it.
you're not.
Well,
And-
student work we can't do.
And there was actually in reference to the emails that were out here, just to back up a little bit, where it said you can read a book in peace, knit, do whatever else you want, but you can also roam the city if possible. So it's not, I'm having a hard time digesting that this is, that you're going above and beyond for a 14-hour day. You're talking to a group of volunteers that don't get paid, that are sitting here at 7 o'clock at night to hear this grievance. So for people that volunteer, it's hard to relate to a guidance counselor. That's in my opinion, I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, that's your job to go and attend and see after these students. And to Jessica's point, you're salaried employees, not hourly, so to submit 3 invoices to us on a per diem hourly rate of $75 an hour, $48 an hour, and the other yours isn't broken down, but to me, it's disrespectful to, I think, to us and our students to even raise this issue. That's, everyone else has said their piece, so I'm saying mine.
Are there any additional questions for either party from members of the board?
Josh has his hand
Am I
up.
allowed to speak as a non-union employee?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think you're
No.
out of
sorry.
luck there, but I
Thanks for-
appreciate
thank
your
you.
gumption. I would be in the same position probably as you, wanting to say something. Now, yeah, I just get to. Hearing no additional questions, I don't have anything. Will either party care to make a closing remark to the board?
No,
No, I think we both stated our positions.
Okay, so the board will, I guess I have a thing to read here, but the board will deliberate. Does the board care to deliberate here, or would it be a massive inconvenience for the board to step out on everybody else's behalf so that they don't have to? Okay,
The other room looks better.
so we'll step out to deliberate. So the meeting will be recessed, I suppose, formally. And if we want or need to hear from any of you, we will send somebody out to tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Board of Education hereby denies the grievance on the grounds that there is no contractual violation, and that the board hereby authorizes its board counsel to send a written copy of this decision to the union leadership. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Wait, here. Sue and
Glenn.
Okay.
Okay, there is a motion before us. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll proceed to a vote. Mr. Kisco's requested that there be a roll call vote, so Ellen, if you would call the vote by roll.
Mr. Berger?
Yes.
Mr. Corey?
Aye.
Mr. Cronin?
Mr. Curtis, Mr. Ugalito,
I agree with this.
Ms. Gomez, same thing. Mr. Kiska,
Opposed.
Mr. Putnam,
That's, what we get 8 to 7 to 1.
7-1.
Okay, so with a vote of 7 to 1, the motion carries. I don't think there's any other business on our posted meeting agenda, so I will hear a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
And 7-3.
Thank you, board.
Thank you.
Good consideration and good questions.
Thank you.